If you dance this waltz, you marry my son." Millionaire mocked, but Black Maid was dance champ. The ballroom of Manhattan's newest skyscraper glittered with chandeliers, champagne, and the smug laughter of the city's wealthiest elite. At the center of it all stood William Thompson III, the millionaire tycoon hosting the gala, whiskey glass in hand, ego swelling with every chuckle from his circle of admirers. Suddenly, the music stopped. A crystal tray had slipped from trembling hands, crashing against the marble floor. Shards scattered across the room like fallen stars. Every eye turned toward the culprit, Keisha Williams, 35, a contract cleaner who had been working the gallery events for only 3 weeks. Williams sneered, his voice loud enough to cut through the silence. "If you can dance a waltz, I'll marry my son to you." Gasps rippled through the 200 guests. Some women covered their mouths, pretending to be shocked. Others smirked, enjoying the cruelty as if it were theater. "Dad, that's ridiculous," whispered Jonathan Thompson, 28, shifting uncomfortably at his father's side. But William ignored him, drunk on both whiskey and power. No, let me finish," he boomed, striding to the center of the room as if presiding over court. "This woman can't even carry a tray properly. Let's test her. If she can dance better than my wife, I'll marry my son to her on the spot." Imagine the heir to the Thompson fortune marrying the cleaning lady. The room erupted in cruel laughter. Keisha remained kneeling, gathering broken glass with steady hands. Her face showed no humiliation, no fear. Instead, her eyes carried a strange calm, as though she were measuring every insult, every cruel laugh, weighing something deeper than the moment itself. When she finally stood, the room quieted. She met William's eyes. For a heartbeat, silence pressed against the marble walls. "I accept," she said. Her voice was clear, steady, cutting through the hall like a blade. Even the orchestra fell silent, unsure whether they had heard her correctly. William blinked, caught off guard. "What did you say?" "I said, I accept your challenge." A subtle smile touched her lips, a smile that unsettled more than a few of the guests. The laughter grew louder, filling the air like poison, yet no one noticed the faint glimmer in Keisha's eyes, the same spark that had once set the world's greatest stages alight, before a single night of tragedy changed everything. Whispers followed Kesha like shadows as she returned to her corner of the ballroom. Some guests mocked her under their breath. Others placed bets on how long she would last before running out in tears. But she didn't flinch. Jonathan, however, couldn't stay still. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You don't have to go through with this," he murmured. "My father, he's cruel when he's drunk." Kesha glanced at him, her calm eyes meeting his worried ones. "I've lived through worse," she replied softly, her tone steady, almost soothing. "A dance won't break me." Jonathan blinked, caught off guard. There was no bitterness in her voice, no desperation, just strength, quiet, unshakable strength. At the far end of the hall, William was laughing with his wife, Margaret, a woman polished in diamonds and cold smiles. She stretched her manicured hand toward him as if daring him to announce her victory before the waltz had even begun. The orchestra stirred, violins trembling as the conductor raised his baton. All eyes returned to Kesha. She moved to the center of the floor. Her simple uniform, a plain black dress and apron, clashing against the glittering gowns around her.
And yet, somehow, she carried herself with the grace of someone who belonged to no one's judgment. "Ladies first," William sneered, gesturing to his wife. Margaret lifted her chin and stepped forward, her jewels catching the light like fire. She moved with the precision of someone trained for appearances, every step rehearsed, every twirl controlled. The guests clapped politely, murmuring approval. When she finished, she gave a mocking bow toward Kesha, her lips curling in triumph. Now it was Kesha's turn. She stepped onto the marble floor, closed her eyes for a moment, and breathed. Somewhere deep inside, the rhythm stirred, the rhythm she thought she had buried forever. And then, with the first note of the waltz, her body began to move. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Every step flowed from her soul, every turn carrying a grace untouched by wealth or privilege. The ballroom fell silent, guests leaning forward as if held by an invisible thread. And when the final note faded, Kesha stood still, chest rising gently, her calm eyes fixed not on William, not on Margaret, but on Jonathan. For the first time that night, he smiled.
The orchestra shifted into a grand waltz, its strings swelling across the ballroom. Guests leaned forward with sparkling eyes, ready to be entertained. Victoria, the lady William had chosen to humiliate Keisha, stepped forward first. Her gown shimmered like liquid gold beneath the chandeliers, the jewels at her throat scattering light across her pale skin. She moved as though the floor itself belonged to her, her lips curled in a proud, practiced smile. Each movement was sharp, flawless, rehearsed. Her spins were perfectly timed, her posture trained to draw admiration. The audience clapped lightly with every turn, and Victoria basked in it, glancing toward William as if demanding his silent applause. "She's extraordinary," one guest whispered. "She's the finest dancer in the city," another added. The words carried across the hall, reaching Keisha's ears like tiny arrows. But Keisha stood in the corner, still, almost unseen. She wore no jewels, no silk, only her simple black maid's uniform. Yet her hands rested calmly at her sides, her breath steady, her eyes lowered in concentration. She wasn't rehearsing steps in her mind. She wasn't thinking of applause or victory. She was listening to the rhythm of the violins, to the soft hum of the floor beneath her feet, to the buried heartbeat of a dancer she had once been. Victoria finished her final spin, lifting her chin high as the crowd applauded politely. She dipped into a graceful bow, her smug smile aimed directly at Keisha, as if the battle was already won. "All yours, Maid," she said under her breath, her tone dripping with cruelty. The hall grew quiet again. Keisha inhaled slowly. She stepped forward, her shoes clicking softly against the marble. The vast ballroom seemed to shrink as every eye locked on her. She looked nothing like a performer. No glittering gown, no painted lips, no jewels in her hair. And yet, when she reached the center of the floor, she closed her eyes and bowed her head slightly. Not to the guests, not to William, not even to her rival, but to the music. Her fingers brushed the folds of her skirt, and with the first gentle rise of the melody, her body began to move. It wasn't the polished sharpness of Victoria's style. It wasn't meant to impress. It was something deeper, fluid, soulful, born from within. Every step seemed to tell a story. Every turn carried a quiet defiance. The room fell into a hush. Guests leaned forward, breathless. Even William, glass of wine in hand, forgot to sneer. And Jonathan, standing at the edge of the floor, felt his chest tighten. For the first time, he wasn't just watching her. He was seeing her. The violins swelled, and Keisha moved as if the music had been written only for her. Her feet traced patterns on the marble floor, not with rigid precision, but with a freedom that seemed impossible. She spun, not fast, not showy, but with such grace that her skirt floated like smoke around her legs. Her arms rose gently, flowing with the melody, as though her body was an instrument and the music its soul. Gasps spread through the crowd. The same guests who had praised Victoria now sat utterly still, their applause forgotten. Their eyes were wide, transfixed. Keisha's waltz wasn't flawless in the way of rehearsed dancers. There were no sharpened edges, no forced smiles. Instead, every step carried something Victoria could never summon. Truth, her pain, her resilience, her unbroken spirit. It was all there, etched into the movements of her body. The hall seemed to vanish. The chandeliers, the polished floors, the sneering nobles, all dissolved into silence. All that remained was Keisha and the music. Jonathan's throat tightened as he watched. He remembered the stories, the whispers, the fragments of a past she had hidden. Keisha, the dancer who once stole stages, who vanished into shadows, and now here she was again. Not the maid they mocked, not the servant they tried to break, but the legend she had always been. Victoria's face paled as she stood to the side, her smirk gone. The applause that once belonged to her was gone too, replaced by stunned silence and open awe. Even William, gripping his glass too tightly, could no longer disguise the shift in the room. When the final note struck, Keisha stopped. Not with a bow, not with a curtsy. She simply lowered her arms, her chest rising and falling softly, as though she had given a part of her very soul to the floor. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, as if on cue, the hall erupted. Thunderous applause shook the chandeliers. Guests rose to their feet, some clapping, some crying, some whispering in disbelief. "Keisha," Jonathan whispered under his breath, his eyes burning. In that single waltz, she had not only silenced her enemies, she had reclaimed herself. The legend had returned. The applause had not stopped. The hall was still trembling with it, voices overlapping, cheers, gasps, and stunned disbelief. Yet in the middle of the storm, Keisha stood quietly, her head lowered, her chest still rising with the rhythm of her dance. "Who is she?" someone whispered near the front row. "She's not just a maid," another voice added. "No one dances like that, no one alive." And then, from the far end of the ballroom, an older woman rose from her seat. Her hands shook as she clutched the railing, her eyes wide with recognition. "It can't be," she whispered, then louder, her voice trembling with emotion. "Keisha? Moreau?" The name carried like lightning. First a murmur, then a wave, and finally an explosion that swept through the hall like fire through dry grass. Keisha Moreau, the prodigy, the lost dancer of Manhattan. She vanished years ago. Everyone thought... The whispers rose, overlapping, colliding, until the entire hall seemed to vibrate with one truth. Keisha did not move. She did not flinch. Her eyes remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides.
She had feared this moment for years. The name she had buried, the past she had locked away, now uncovered under the brilliance of chandeliers and the weight of hundreds of eyes. Jonathan's heart pounded. The name struck him like thunder. He had heard it before, in articles, in whispered conversations between old aristocrats. Keisha Moreau, the girl who danced once as if born from heaven, then vanished without a trace. And now she was standing before him. Not a maid, not a shadow, but her. Victoria staggered back, her face drained of blood. The plan to humiliate Keisha had turned into something monstrous, something she could not control. "This isn't possible," she muttered under her breath, but the truth was undeniable. Keisha finally lifted her head. "Yes," she said softly, her voice carrying despite its quietness. "I am Keisha Moreau." The room went utterly still. Some gasped, some applauded louder, others simply stared, as though unable to reconcile the maid they had dismissed with the legend now standing in front of them. And in that stillness, Keisha felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear, the hiding, the shame, all of it burned away. For the first time in years, she stood not as a servant, not as someone defined by her suffering, but as herself. The truth was out, and Manhattan would never forget her name again. The ballroom was still alive with Kesha's name echoing in every corner. Keisha Moreau, the legend. But in the shadows near the judges' table, William's face turned crimson. The man who had mocked her, who had dismissed her as nothing more than a maid, now stood exposed before the very people whose respect he craved. "You mean to tell me," one gentleman whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "that the same William who laughed at her didn't recognize Keisha Moreau?" "How blind," another added. "Arrogant fool," muttered a lady, shaking her jeweled head. The ripple of disdain spread quickly. The more the crowd admired Keisha, the more they looked at William with contempt. William tried to recover, puffing his chest, forcing a smirk. "Of course I knew," he said, his voice loud and unconvincing. "I was simply testing her. Anyone could have seen her talent." But his words fell flat. Jonathan, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. His voice cut through the noise, steady and sharp. "No, William, you didn't see her talent. You trampled on it. You humiliated her when you thought she was beneath you. That is the measure of a man." The crowd gasped. All eyes turned to William. For the first time, his confidence faltered. His smirk twitched. His words stumbled. He had always relied on status, on wealth, on the illusion of superiority. But tonight, all of it turned to ash. Victoria, standing beside him, refused to meet his eye. Her silence was another dagger. The crowd had judged him already. The whispers grew louder. "He'll never recover from this. What disgrace! Arrogance has a price." And William, once proud, once so certain of his untouchable position, felt the walls closing in. The spotlight that had once favored him now revealed every crack, every flaw, every cruelty. Keisha did not need to speak. Her very presence was his undoing. The legend had risen, and the arrogant had fallen. The morning after the gala, Manhattan woke to headlines that carried one name on every page: Keisha Moreau. Her waltz was described as a miracle, her story as a resurrection. From the high towers of Wall Street to the cafes where students gathered, everyone spoke of the woman who had been dismissed as a servant, yet rose to silence the city with her grace. But Keisha was no longer dancing for Manhattan's approval.
she had learned something greater, that true strength came not from applause, but from the courage to rise after being broken. She reopened her small studio, not in a golden hall, but in a modest neighborhood where children peeked through the windows with wide eyes. "Come," she told them with a smile. "Dance isn't for the rich or the chosen. It's for anyone with a heartbeat." Soon the floor echoed not just with her footsteps, but with laughter, clumsy turns, and the rhythm of new dreams. Parents wept quietly, watching their children move with a freedom they had never known. Keisha became more than a dancer. She became a teacher, a guide, a light. Her name inspired not only professionals, but ordinary souls who had long buried their passions. Around the world, letters poured in. "You gave me courage to try again. You reminded me that broken wings can still fly." Even Jonathan, who had defended her when the world seemed cruel, stood by her side, not as a savior, but as a partner who believed in her strength. Together they rebuild not just her life, but a vision of what art could mean for the world. And though the ballrooms of Manhattan would forever whisper about the night Keisha Morrow returned, she knew the true triumph wasn't in silencing a crowd, it was in giving hope to those who thought they had none. The legend had been reborn, but more importantly, a new beginning had begun.
A story of dignity, redemption, and true nobility. Years passed. Manhattan's skyline grew taller. Fortunes rose and fell, but one story never faded. The night a forgotten servant silenced a ballroom with her dance. Keisha Morrow was no longer merely a name. She was a symbol. Her small studio blossomed into a foundation that spread across continents, opening doors for children who had only known struggle. In orphanages, refugee camps, and quiet towns, young feet moved to rhythms that carried her spirit forward. People no longer spoke of her humiliation, only of her grace. The cruel whispers of the past had been drowned out by the roar of admiration from a world she had inspired. What once was seen as weakness had become her crown. And those who had mocked her, William most of all, faded into shadows, remembered only as the arrogance that fueled her rise. True nobility was never in power, wealth, or titles. It was in resilience, in kindness, in the courage to keep moving when the world demanded you kneel. On a quiet evening years later, Keisha stood at the edge of a stage watching her students bow after a breathtaking performance. She wore no diamonds, no crown, only a simple dress and a smile that carried peace. The applause thundered, not for her, but for the lives she had touched. Jonathan took her hand, and in his eyes she saw not pity or rescue, but pride. Pride in the woman she had become, in the light she had chosen to share. The legend of Keisha Morrow was never about the fall from grace. It was about the rise after it. Her story would be told not as one of tragedy, but of dignity. Not as one of shame, but of redemption. Not of arrogance defeated, but of true nobility revealed. And as the curtain fell on her life's greatest stage, the world knew one truth. Sometimes the most broken souls carry the power to heal millions. Keisha Morrow had been broken once, but she rose not just to dance again, but to teach the world how to stand. We invite you to join Midlight Stories if this story strikes a chord with you, makes you smile, or stirs up strong emotions in you. Each story is meant to uplift, heal, and remind you of the beauty that comes from human connection. Share this story with someone who believes in kindness and second chances by clicking the subscribe button and turning on the notification bell. Keep your heart open till we cross paths again, because you never know when someone might ask, Can I join you here?